You're listening to Homeschool Connections, brought to you by the Homeschool Research Lab at the Johns Hopkins School of Education Institute for Education Policy. The Homeschool Research Lab aims to inform and influence evidence based education policy by expanding access to homeschool data and conducting high quality research. Through our Homeschool Hub and diverse collaborative efforts, we provide unbiased information, share rigorous academic studies, and translate findings into actionable policy insights that can ultimately benefit all students, including those that are homeschooled. I'm Christy Batts, a research fellow for the lab. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest research, data, and insights surrounding homeschooling. We'll dispel myths, inform stakeholders, and advance evidence-driven discussions. Today, we're here with Dr. Cheryl Field-Smith. She's a professor and head of the Department of Educational Theory and Practice at the University of Georgia. She's a pioneer in the homeschool research field and the preeminent scholar of Black home education in the United States. She is a mentor to many established and emerging scholars across the globe and has most recently authored the book, Creating Educational Justice Learning from Black Home Educators. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored. Thank you.
Tell us about your book. We're so excited. Your last book was a game changer for me as a scholar.
So this one from Harvard Press, they invited me to write it. So I asked them what exactly they had in mind, and what they were wondering is, of all my years of talking to Black home educators, are there any universal lessons that educators anywhere could benefit from? And I said, "Oh, yeah, absolutely, yes." So in this book, I take the 3 major studies that I've done over the past 17 years, and I looked for what are the overarching lessons that we can learn from this data about how to teach Black children, how to teach children anywhere, regardless of race. What are the universal lessons that we can learn? And so the first one was the need for education to make connections to healing. And it's not just healing for children, but it was healing for families, for mothers, healing for communities, paying attention to the humanity of teaching and learning. When I'm teaching at UGA, one of my roles is I teach future teachers. And so I'm constantly getting them to really think about the children in their classroom, really think about the learning. When you go out in the field, it's testing, testing, testing. It's standards, 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 but it's human beings that you're trying to get to learn first. And those human beings come from families of human beings. And so let's not forget the humanity of what we're doing. So that's one. And another one is I talk about the role of community, the importance of community. We're not just teaching in a school, we're teaching in a school that's located in a community. And the historical context of that, the social political context of that, but also how is that community working to really take care of children learning and to protect children's learning and to enhance children's learning, and how are people working together to do that? It's just looking across all of the studies and what I see that's common among most Black homeschool families.
I really appreciate you going into that because something that your decades of homeschool research have shown us is that there are some overarching similarities across communities.
Mhm.
So, what is Black home education? But also, antithetical to that overarching universal lesson, something that is unique in your research is that you are able to pull out the differences and the lessons we can learn from the differences among us.
Yeah.
So, what are the differences with Black home education that we can learn from as well?
Yeah. You first asked what Black home education
Mhm.
is, and so we have a special issue coming out. And in that special issue, we talk about the difference between Black home education and Black homeschooling. And one of the things we're pulling on to do that is back in the 90s, I believe, maybe even later, there was a book by a scholar. His last name is Shuya, and he wrote this book called Too Much Schooling, not enough education. And so he distinguishes between this idea of schooling as the things that happens in the institution of school, public schools, private schools, that are set up to get students to assimilate into society. And unfortunately, those same things are also preserving the status quo rather than encouraging students to think outside the box, whereas schooling gets children and students to conform. You think about having children being passive learners rather than active learners having voice and choice in their education. So when you talk to home educators, when you look at the research, they lean heavily on education, not schooling in their processes. Many home educators will engage in unschooling or deschooling to undo some of those things. What does it mean to be a good student? What does it mean to learn? No, you can chart your own path. You can have your own voice in your learning, and we can think of it as discovery and exploring. And learning is also creating when we do education rather than schooling. And so in this special issue, we made a strategic and intentional choice to use Black home education. That said, there are tremendous differences. And when you set out to do any work in home education, you have to have a definition where it's flexible and fluid as to what does home education mean, because it's going to have to look different. Children are different. They need different things. Families are different. They prioritize different things. They believe different things. So, for example, Black educators are not all religious. Some of them are secular. Some of them are religious, but they don't base their homeschool practice completely on their faith. So there's degrees of separation that will cause differences in how faith or religious beliefs influence the learning in a Black homeschool family. Some Black home educators are leaning towards unschooling. It's the let the child direct their path. And then some of them have much more structure. There's particular curriculum that they're following, and everything in between those two, if you think of those as extremes, right? Being completely reliant on a program or a curriculum, or letting children chart their own. And so even when we try to research their practice, there has to be fluidity in our definition of what counts as homeschooling. We do have some homeschool researchers today who only think homeschooling is when mom and dad are curating and teaching. When we start to farm it out to other people or share that teaching responsibility with other people, they discount that. I think in 2026, we have to stop doing that.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you're going to miss out on some of the iterations of home education if you only count it as mom and dad doing the teaching. We have too many varieties now of how home education is done. It is increasingly single parent families have greater access to doing homeschooling than in the past today because of all the different ways that we can accomplish it, depending on your state laws and what you have access to.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate that differentiation and the appreciation for the fluidity of definitions, because that's
Yeah.
something in this field that there's been a continual conversation around even as
Yes.
practice has changed. So I wanna take a moment just to talk about that, because you've been around for a long time in a field that, is fairly niche, but is gaining a footprint in education research as a whole. So how you've seen the research field within homeschool research evolve.
The first time I presented anything on Black home education, it was at AERA, and the room was filled with more reporters than researchers, and I was so overwhelmed. So that doesn't happen anymore. Whenever I talk to a reporter, I have to tell them I'm not speaking for every Black homeschool family in America. I've only talked to, at that time, it's like, this is just 24 people in America, don't extrapolate to everybody, please. But it has changed because it's homeschooling and home education has become more normative since I started. Back then, I commonly heard the pushback that Black home educators would get from their immediate families, their mothers and fathers who We're a lot of times we're educators, or they were just so pro public education. What are you doing to my grandchildren? No. Even if they were educators themselves trying to homeschool their children, they were just like, no, this is not what we do. But when you talk to them today, you don't hear that as much. So it even in within the Black community, it's becoming more normative. If they're the first in their family to homeschool, they're brave. They're doing something that they've never experienced, trying to create a learning environment and process for their children to help them to succeed. Let's face it, it's a lot easier to send your children to school in some ways, right? So when you take up that enormous responsibility and you're the first one in your family to do it, I think that's something to be celebrated and to be in awe of. So that's changed. I think the definition of homeschooling, when I first started out, it was more of mom and our dad at the kitchen table with the occasional 1 or 2 days at a co-op. When did my first study, I sent the call for participants to various communities and venues. And some of the people that responded at that time had their children enrolled in the state public charter school. So the state would not have counted them as home educators, but they are responding to my call. And I thought maybe I should not take them as participants, but then I use Black feminist theory, and when you use Black feminist theory and in darkened feminist epistemologies, one of the hallmarks of those is the power of self naming, the power of allowing your participants to put themselves with the labels, not you labeling them, but they say they are home educators. So I said, no, I need to talk to these people. The state doesn't count you. Why are you putting yourself in this position? And the answer repeatedly was this: the state funded charter school only requires 4 hours a day of instruction. So they turn on their computer, they do their teaching, and they do their lessons, and they're done. What am I doing the rest of the day? We're not done. And so what are they doing? They've plugged in to the homeschool community. And they are going to co-ops. They are bringing their children to courses that are being run by other home educators. They're going on field trips with homeschool. Like, they are part of the homeschool community. And that's why they're self-identifying and responding to the call. They are intimately connected and a part of the homeschool community.
If anybody is interested in intersectionality, phenomenology, and Black feminist theory, please read Cheryl Field-Smith work, because you are textbook case study of how to use these theories and methodologies with fidelity to protecting participants.
What would it mean to do phenomenology in a culturally responsive manner? Because I have to protect my participants. I can't go in there like anyone else would go in there and ask these questions. I have to honor the cultural ways of knowing and being and thinking. And so I have to use Black feminist theory in order to do phenomenology, what is phenomenology? Down to its core, we're trying to understand a phenomenon from the perspective of the people that we're engaging in the research with. How can I understand it from their perspective if I'm not understanding their cultural epistemologies and ways of being? And that's how I look at it.
Part of your success is that you have been able to build that trust and rapport with your participants. What do we know about homeschooling now, today, and what do you still want to know?
Yeah. Specifically with Black home education, we know that it's diverse. We know that it's dynamic. We know that the community tend to be close, protective of one another. They share in ways that are counter to the ideas of individualism. And we share in ways where we're sharing resources and ideas and supporting and lifting one another up. I didn't homeschool my children, but they did call me a part-time home educator because I never relied on the school to teach my children. I also was my children's teacher. But when you think about homeschooling and the challenges, not every day is glorious. There are some days that just don't seem to go well, and they are there to lift one another up. When a family says, I'm not sure I still want to do this, which is real, right? Because like I said, it's a lot easier in my mind to send kids to school. Now, easier, but not the best for every child. And that's why people homeschool. So when you're taking up that responsibility, we know that there's challenges there, that the self-efficacy of the parents needs to be constantly encouraged and supported. We know that homeschooling laws vary across the state, and so much so that I found that in Georgia, it was possible for a home educator to homeschool other people's children and get paid to do so, creating sort of a homeschool school, if you will. Whereas other states had laws that would say you can only homeschool one person outside of your immediate family, no more. Well, then you can't have that homeschool school happening. And the homeschool school phenomena is important because that's how single parents are able to homeschool. That's how working parents are able to homeschool because way the law is written. And I would join the bandwagon to fight against anybody that wanted to take that away because some children need to be homeschooled because the way our schools are being run today, most of the time, children have to behave in a certain way. Children have to learn in a certain way because the districts around me are telling teachers it's February 6th, it's 10 o'clock, and you're teaching third grade. I should be able to walk in and see this lesson. And when we do that to professional educators, we're not giving room for the children who aren't ready for that lesson or for the children who are far above that lesson. I left my classroom in 1999 to pursue my PhD. I didn't have No Child Left Behind type of pressures. I was teaching fourth grade, but I had second grade material because that's where they were. So I was able to meet them where they were and bring them up. I had some students who I could send to the fifth grade teacher for math because that's what they needed. I don't hear about the possibility of doing those things anymore in classrooms. So it's dangerous to children. And if a parent should have a right to make that decision. Nobody else knows the child better than the parent. And if the school isn't doing justice, the state promises sound basic education to every child. But these schools aren't always doing that for every child. And that means parents need to have the right to choose, period. Until the schools become better. I don't even know what that would look like at this point.
It's
Completely.
circling back to the title of your book, Creating Educational Justice.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
What do you want to know still about Black home education?
So when I started this in 2005, my Black parents tell me they were mentored by Black home educators in the 1990s. I want to know how far back I could trace that. I'm really curious. I would love to know more about individual subjects, diving into what does reading look like in Black home education? What does social studies look like? I'm curious about the children's perspective. Only really talked to parents. I'm a family engagement person. I'm a parental involvement person. And so I really wanted to understand from a parent perspective, why and how are you doing this? But I think now it's time to hear more from the children. What has this experience been like for you? And will you do it with your children? Why or why not? Would be a question I would ask them. Is this a start of a new generation? Is it going to be ongoing? Because it's rare for me to meet a Black person who was homeschooled, who is also homeschooling their children. That's a phenomena that I would love to look at, the intergenerational aspects of it. The significance of No Child Left Behind. So as an educator, I'll never forget the day No Child Left Behind. This is one of the reasons I pursued my PhD. I first began teaching in an inner city where at that time we didn't even have a copier, Christy. We had Ditto machine. And it had purple ink that would get all over your clothes if you weren't careful. We didn't even have a copier. We had to buy our own chalk. There was no social studies or science curriculum. We taught math and reading and writing all day long, and that's it. That's all they cared about. I had to infuse and make up my own. I looked at the state standards and then made sure that my kids got social studies and science because those are my favorite subjects to teach. I want to do reading and math all day long. We're going to infuse the reading and math in our social studies and science and have fun. And so I did that, but I would get in trouble for that. I would get in trouble for going off the script. I lasted 1 year there. I went maybe 20 miles down the road. I'm not sharing my teaching assistant with 3 other teachers. I have my own all day long. I have copiers, I have computers, I have a robust science and social studies curriculum. So the kids 20 minutes up the road in the inner city are not getting the same quality of education as the kids in this, in the suburb. How is that fair? And how can I allow that to stand? Why are we allowing that to stand? It really bothered me. Then I read Savage Inequalities. I'm blown away by not only is it allowed to happen, we can write about it and still do nothing.
That precipitated you into your higher
My
education,
PhD
yeah,
work.
your PhD
Yeah.
work, and then you found homeschooling,
Mhm.
and that.
Right, that's right. So I understand why families would homeschool in the era of No Child Left Behind.
Right.
But the fact that Black people were homeschooling in the '90s, I wanna know what the motivations were then. As an educator, I'm thinking it's different, but maybe it's the same.
Did you see any type of a change or after the pandemic?
Yes, there's definitely a difference. First of all, we have more people homeschooling. So my initial study, I had parents that tended to be older that were in the homeschool community. But now, post-pandemic, we're getting younger parents. The use of the online learning, once you create that ability to have a child taught online and you're still keeping a roof over your head, you figured that part out. And now you're watching your child thrive. You don't want to go back.
That is something that the hub has collected data on, just participation rates and how they did go down from their peak at the, shutdown, but they haven't gone all the way back to the way it was pre-pandemic. People are kind of either newly coming into the space and or maintaining that homeschool.
Right.
What do we know about Black home education that can translate to other minority communities within homeschooling? I know that you've written a chapter on this in another book.
Yeah, I think we have a lot in common across other with other groups. And just first of all, the idea of putting our children first in their learning, most of us want to do that regardless of our racial background or cultural background. And I have a whole chapter devoted to that because I remember as a teacher, we were given these little Apple pens, really tiny, like lapel pins that said children first. And there was all these banners, children first, like we're putting children first. We were not the way a homeschool family does. I taught in a school that assumed the Bank Street model, which is a children's first model. It's out of constructivism, created by someone who studied directly under John Dewey. Social studies is first, the driving subject, hands-on instruction. We were not allowed to go to the teacher store and put posters up. If we wanted a poster in our classroom, we had to create it or the children had to create it. All kinds of things. We weren't really expected to use textbooks. Textbooks were a resource, not the resource. And so I had a whole lot of freedom, even as a public school teacher in two schools that had a Bank Street model. And even within that, we're not doing necessarily exactly what a homeschool family can do because public schools have limitations to what they can do with individualized curriculum. But I see home educators really letting children determine their learning goals. This is what I want to achieve this year. I don't know that we do that in public school all the time.
Mhm.
But I think it would be a way of my future teachers are always concerned about behavior. They're always concerned about kids off task. Well, if kids are allowed to have learning goals of their own that they choose, they're gonna have more skin in the game, and you won't have as much behavior problem because you're getting them to be self-directed, and that's ultimately the goal, I think, is to get our little human beings to love to learn and to learn how to learn. Whether you're in public school or whether you're homeschooling, a private school, I just think that should be one of the things we're trying to do.
And you have a great cohort of mentees that have made, their own mark in the world because
Absolutely.
of their own interests, but also because you have encouraged them and given them some of that confidence. So, what are you learning from your mentees, and where do you see the homeschool research field going because of them?
Yeah, I there are doctoral students across the country doing all types of work. Dr. Rachel Johnson out of Wisconsin, captured the voices of youth. If you really want to look at how to engage in the trustworthiness and the credibility of qualitative research to the umpteenth, I've never seen anybody do it beyond expectation. Her commitment to the community that she researched with through that methodology is outstanding. This is a great study designed with great integrity. I've never seen so much integrity. Dr. Matthew Rankin, who came out of Emory, has done research I've never seen done anywhere else in the Black homeschool community. He paid attention to gender roles. What do Black parents do with their girls differently with their boys? And I think that that's powerful. Mariah Johnson, coming out of Loyola, doing work, looking at the Black community and how it functions. So rather than looking at the unit of a family, the unit is a particular community, and just seeing those dynamics, which is going to be powerful. Dr. Timberly Baker, who has a background in rural education that she's bringing to the homeschooling lens, which is very, very important. We have Najarian Peters. Professor Peters uses privacy law to make the case that Black home educators are child privacy protectors. They're preserving their children's childhood. I can tell you stories about Black children's experiences in public schools where pre-K, kindergarten, they're treated like grown-ups. They're not even, I would argue, sometimes not even seen human. And so this is why we homeschool, because we're protecting our children's ability to be children, period, and to let them just be. And so the freedom to be and become is what her work talks about. This is what Black home educators are doing. And I think that that was a necessary, like when I read that, I was blown away. Absolutely necessary contribution. And I'm so glad that we have her in the community. She also does work with technology now and looking at the protection of that, which most home educators are just like teachers everywhere, educators everywhere are like, how does AI work with this? With this education stuff, how, and so she's taking up technology as well. So yeah, there's a lot of good work coming out of Black homeschool community, research community that has implications and connections to everybody that's interested in education.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for plugging each of these scholars. There's so many
There's more.
yeah, there's so
Yeah.
many that you didn't name, but you did name some big heavy hitters. Yeah, yeah. Well, what projects are you working on right now that you're excited about?
The one thing I would really, really like to make progress in is creating a documentary on Black home education. I don't know if anybody's ever watched the High on the Hog docuseries. That's what motivated me. So the docuseries High on the Hog, the whole intent there is to show, to document how food from the continent of Africa has made its way into American food cuisine. And there's so many different ways that they had to have multiple episodes, and now there's multiple seasons. I honestly could do that with Black home education. I do want to do a documentary. That is my number one focus. If I don't do anything with my research this year, I want to make progress with that because I just did a keynote with a statewide group of Black home educators. And at the end of it, I asked them, how can research help your homeschool communities? And that's one of the things they want to show the success that they have. They want to show that they are not a monolith. They want to bust paradigms and stereotypes about Black people. That's one of the things that motivated me to stay doing this work in Black home education because we think Black parents are not engaged in their education. This is a new semester. I got a whole brand new group of pre-service teachers, and I walked in on one of my students saying, well, these parents don't care about their children. What? We've got a lot of learning to do this semester. What I don't even know who these parents. I can only assume who they were thinking. I got on my soapbox for a minute and then I said, okay, we've got all semester. We'll work on this. But that is not true. We also have stereotypes that prevent Black children from getting into gifted. There's been multiple cases where children's behavior keeps them from gifted. That's not how gifted's supposed to work. That's not how it's supposed to work. Well, when he or she behaves, then maybe we'll consider it. Excuse me, if they're qualified, what? Why would you deny somebody access to the test, access to gifted just because of their behavior? Have you ever thought maybe they're misbehaving because you're not challenging them, right? So things like that to show that, to document it. So my work provides voice to what is it like to be the parent of a child who has been labeled a troublemaker, and the parent is trying to work with the school to undo the label. But the school, once that label gets tacked on, it is very hard to not be seen as a troublemaker anymore. And so we homeschool. So I want to continue to document those stories, to show people schools need to improve. And you know what? I write about this in the book too. The majority of Black home educators I met want public schools to work. They are not anti public schools. The majority of them, their first choice was a public or private institution, not homeschooling. They want the schools to work. How long do we wait?
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for
Thank you.
plugging your book again. I think if you don't read anything else this year, please read Creating Educational Justice by Cheryl Field-Smith.
Thank you. That's
Thank
good.
you so much for being with us today, Cheryl.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for an episode of the Homeschool Connections. For more resources, research, and data, connect with us on social media at JHU Homeschool or visit us online at education.jhu.edu/edpolicy, where you can click through to explore the Homeschool Hub and scroll down to sign up for our newsletter. If today's episode sparked ideas or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Christy Batts with the Johns Hopkins Homeschool Research Lab.